I had picked out the dress 2 months in advance. Soft teal, not quite blue, not quite green, the kind of color that only looks expensive if you pair it with silence and pearls. I had those too. My mother's handed down to me in a velvet box the week before my wedding when she whispered, "Always wear them when you want to be remembered." I steamed that dress the night before, took it from the hanger like it was something sacred, laid it across the bed, and just stood there, looking at it, pressing my palm flat across the bodice like I was smoothing down old memories. I curled my hair in rollers the way I used to when I wanted to feel a little, not young, but lovely. I even painted my nails. I hadn't done that in years. I took a cab to the venue. Didn't want to risk parking in the wrong place showing up flustered. I remember checking the address 3 times, some country estate just outside the city. The kind of place where people pose beside trees in tailored suits and pretend the world isn't falling apart. It was August. The kind of heat that clings to the inside of your knees and your lower back. And yet I remember shivering in that cab, my hands going clammy the closer we got. I didn't know why. Maybe I did. The ceremony was already starting when I arrived. I thought I was late, but later I realized they just hadn't told me the real time. I stood at the back under the awning watching my son, my only child, say vows I'd never heard to a woman who had never once called me mom. He didn't look back. Didn't scan the crowd. His eyes stayed forward like he was crossing a line. Afterwards, I followed the crowd to the reception hall. There were fairy lights strung from every beam glassware that looked too expensive to touch, and a seating chart mounted on a gilded mirror near the door. I stood in front of it longer than I should have, squinting at the rows of names. I saw his father's name, a man who hadn't shown up to a single parent-teacher meeting. I saw his stepmother's name. I saw the bride's cousins and co-workers and childhood dentist. I didn't see mine. I ran my finger down the columns until I found it. Small font. Tucked under a heading that said, "Other guests." No table number, no family designation, just Mrs. Eleanor M., like I was someone's distant memory. I thought it had to be a mistake. So I approached the wedding coordinator, a sweet girl no older than 25, sweating lightly under a headset. I told her my name. She nodded like she recognized it but couldn't place it. "Oh," she said, pulling out a clipboard. "Right. She said you'd be arriving late. We weren't sure where to. I think you'll be standing. I looked behind me at the round tables, white linen, stretched tight centerpieces blooming in pale pinks and creams. Every chair had a place card, every guest had a glass. I glanced to the head table where my son was laughing at something the best man said. His hand was on the bride's back. She leaned in. They looked happy, framed in flowers, eternal. I didn't say anything to the girl, just smiled or maybe winced. I turned on my heel. I remember the sound my heels made on the marble, that sharp tap like a judge's gavel, and I walked straight through the room, out the far doors, into the parking lot. No one called after me, not even him. The air outside was thick and humid, the kind of warmth that wraps around your neck like a scarf you don't want. I didn't cry, not then. I just stood under the portico watching guests trickle in, wondering if they thought I was staff. A woman in a teal dress with perfect pearls and no place to sit. There was a bench near the valet stand. I sat down, palms against my knees. I heard someone inside start clinking a glass for the first toasts. The sound echoed through the doors like a bell tolling. My hands were shaking, but I didn't look down. I just stared at the road ahead, the horizon smeared in late summer orange. Somewhere out there, people were living real lives, not curated, not filtered for the sake of someone else's dream. Just real. And I wanted to be among them. I called another cab, told the driver to take me anywhere with linen napkins and red wine. He asked if I was okay. I said yes. I lied. The cab smelled faintly of lemon-scented wipes and something cheaper trying to cover up cigarette smoke. The driver, a man with a soft profile and kind eyes, kept glancing at me in the rearview mirror like he wanted to ask something but didn't know how. I appreciated his silence. I wasn't ready to break mine. We drove for 20 minutes. I stared out the window watching trees blur into storefronts into streetlights. I asked him to drop me near the Riverwalk downtown. There was a little Italian place there. Linen napkins, decent wine, a view of the water if you sat near the windows. I'd only been once before, alone then too, but that time had been my choice. That night it felt like a rescue. They seated me in a corner booth. The hostess offered me a menu with too much sympathy. I must have looked out of place, pearls too. Formal makeup, slightly melted eyes. Well, there's no fixing eyes like mine after something like that. I ordered a glass of Montepulciano and didn't open the menu. I wasn't hungry. I just needed to feel real again. I held the wine glass with both hands. It steadied me somehow, the cool stem against my palms, the low hum of conversation around me. Nobody there knew who I was or what had just happened. I liked that. I thought of my son then, 1,000 versions of him, the boy who once kissed my cheek with sticky jelly lips, the teenager who sat silent beside me in the emergency room when I fainted from exhaustion, the young man I drove 12 hours straight to help move into his first off-campus apartment. He had cried then, arms around my neck like he never wanted to let go. When did that boy go silent? I've replayed the years more times than I care to admit. When his father left, my son was 6. He had a red bowl he always insisted on using for cereal and a collection of dinosaur pajamas he wore even when they got too short. He didn't cry much, but sometimes I'd hear him at night, muffled sobs through the wall. I remember sitting outside his door, palm flat against it, whispering that I wasn't going anywhere, and I didn't. Not when I had the chance. I was working in administration at the time, a small university office job. Nothing glamorous. But there was an offer, a relocation, more money, better hours. The catch was that it would have moved us 2 states away. I asked him gently if he'd be okay starting over. He said, "Will my dad know where to find me?" That was enough. So I stayed. I turned it down. I turned down a lot of things back then. Promotions, trips, dates. Once even a proposal. He was 9, and the man I'd been seeing asked if I was ready to build a future. I looked at my son that night sitting cross-legged on the floor with his science kit spread out like a crime scene, and I said no, not yet. He needed me more. He always needed me. There was the time he got suspended in 7th grade, some nonsense about fighting, defending a friend. The principal called me at work. I left in the middle of a budget meeting and drove straight there. I didn't even put my shoes back on, just ran across the parking lot in my heels, heart pounding, arms shaking. When I found him in the office, he looked up at me like a child, even though he was taller than me by then. I held his face in my hands and told the principal, whatever he did, we'll fix it. We. It was always we. I paid for his braces, for his summer camps, for the therapist he saw after a panic attack in high school. I sat with him during college applications typing when he was too tired, proofing essays late into the night. I remember one draft began, "My mother taught me what resilience looks like." I cried reading that. I cried harder when he got into Berkeley and told me I was the first call he made. I took out a second mortgage to cover what scholarships didn't. Ate canned soup for weeks when he needed a textbook that cost $300. Sent care packages every month, socks, snacks, those dumb tea bags he liked that always smelled like cardboard but calmed him down before exams. When he moved back after graduation, I gave him the master bedroom, said I preferred the smaller one anyway. He'd bring girls over sometimes, tiptoeing like a teenager, forgetting I could hear every word. He never introduced them. Until her, Marissa. She was polite at first. Too polite. Smiling with her teeth, never her eyes. She'd leave dishes in the sink and giggle when I washed them. "You're just so nurturing," she said once after I folded her laundry. I thought it was a compliment. She moved in 6 months later. They didn't ask, just started rearranging things. My spice rack, the bookshelf. She changed the Wi-Fi password and said, "I'll text it to you." I laughed. Then I didn't. One day I came home and found my wedding photos boxed up. "We're making space," she said. "The living room needs a fresher feel." I remember my son standing behind her, not saying a word. I nodded, carried the box to the garage, and placed it next to the Christmas decorations, a place for things used only once a year. There were little signs, and then there were the silences. I used to tell myself he was just busy. Work was demanding. She was probably stressed. People change. That's what I'd say to myself in the mornings when I'd find the coffee pot already emptied and the sound of their laughter coming from upstairs like I wasn't even home. The quiet started as distant small things. He stopped checking in on his own. If I didn't text, I didn't hear from him. I'd leave dinner on the stove and find it untouched in the morning, the foil pulled back but the food still warm from having sat out all night. Sometimes I'd hear the microwave beep around midnight, not a word of thanks, not even a note. She'd bring me flowers once in a while, but they were always carnations like someone had told her old women liked those. I'd arrange them in a vase just so I could throw them out the next day and not feel guilty. There's something deeply lonely about sitting in a house full of people and feeling like a ghost. I'd tiptoe around my own kitchen like I didn't belong in it. I began to eat in my bedroom quietly cross-legged on the edge of the bed, a towel across my lap like a makeshift tablecloth. "They got engaged in March," he told me in passing between gulps of orange juice as he rushed out the door for work. "Oh," I'd said, setting down the sponge in the sink. "You proposed." He nodded. "Yeah, we're thinking late summer." He didn't ask if I was happy for him. He didn't look me in the eye. He just grabbed his keys and left. Later, I found out from a Facebook post. The photos were already up. Her hand held up like a trophy. His arm tight around her waist, both of them beaming. The caption said, "She said yes to forever." No mention of me. Not even a tag. I didn't press. I offered to help. That was my mistake. I asked if she wanted me to go dress shopping with her. She smiled that polite, dismissive smile and said, "Oh, my mom already booked us a spot. It's kind of a special thing we do, just the two of us." I tried not to let that sting, but it did. 1,000 memories of scraped knees and science fair projects and midnight heartaches, all eclipsed by a woman who'd known him barely 3 years. I asked about the venue, the guest list, the menu. I offered to make a family recipe, one he'd always loved, as a little touch for the reception. She said, "Oh, we're going a different direction. Less traditional." He never corrected her. Not once. Then came the email. I'd sent a message asking about hotel options for out-of-town family. A day later, I received a reply from Marissa, or so I thought. But it wasn't meant for me. It had been forwarded by mistake, her reply to my son still attached. My name in bold, her words sharp. If she insists on coming, fine, but put her in the back. She makes me uncomfortable. And his reply, yeah, I'll handle it. I remember reading it over and over. Not just the words, the tone, the complete lack of hesitation, the cold familiarity in which they spoke about me like I was a problem to be solved, a blemish on their perfect tableau. My hands went numb. The mouse slipped from my grip and clattered onto the desk. I sat there for almost an hour, my face reflected in the screen, pale, still, like something forgotten in a museum case. I didn't cry. Not then. What do you do when the child you sacrificed everything for no longer sees you as part of the picture? There were no apologies, no phone call, no explanation, just silence. As if they were waiting for me to cause a scene. As if the very idea of me being upset would only prove their point. So I did nothing. I sent a simple reply, carefully worded, void of emotion. Thank you for confirming. Let me know if there's anything you'd like me to bring. That was the moment the love started to drain. Not all at once. Not violently. Just a steady leak, like a wound that didn't hurt but still bled. I started moving differently after that, quieter, more slowly. I stopped asking questions. I stopped offering help. I began preparing myself in small, invisible ways for something I couldn't yet name. I'd been pushed out of the center of his life. Not suddenly, not with force, but like a guest being politely ushered toward the door, coat already in hand. And I was supposed to smile through it. There was a group text created a week before the wedding. I was added to it late. Most messages were logistical shuttle arrivals, last-minute dress alterations, a note from the DJ about song preferences. I scanned through them looking for any mention of me, any detail I was supposed to know. There was none. When I asked about the mother-son dance, my son replied with a voice note. He didn't even call. His voice, the same voice I used to sing to sleep, said, "Hey, so we're actually skipping that part. It just felt kind of awkward. Hope that's okay." I replayed it 3 times. Hope that's okay. Like I was an inconvenience even in my silence. I listened to it alone in the hallway, standing barefoot on the cool tile, the walls closing in just a little. I looked down at the veins in my feet, the way my toes curled inward, trying to make themselves small. And I thought, this is what it feels like to vanish. I still bought a dress, still curled my hair, still clung to the hope that maybe, just maybe, they'd come to their senses, that something human would rise up in him at the sight of me, some memory of what we'd shared, some whisper of gratitude, or love, or even decency. I held on to that hope all the way to the venue doors. The email should have been enough. That string of words, impersonal, sharp, devoid of remorse, should have been the end of hope. But it wasn't. I wanted to believe it was a misunderstanding, a moment of stress, that he didn't mean it, that maybe he hadn't seen her message in full, or that he'd reply separately to apologize, to explain, to say he was caught in the middle and didn't know what to do. That's what I kept telling myself as I made a pot of tea I never drank, just to have something warm in my hands while I sat at the kitchen table staring at my phone. 2 days passed. Then 3. No apology. No call. Nothing. On the 4th morning, I opened the mailbox and found a thick cream-colored envelope. heavy paper, elegant cursive, an official wedding invitation. It was postmarked 5 days before the email. Inside was the card with the ceremony details, a folded note from the couple, and an RSVP already marked accepting with pleasure in faded pencil. The note read, "We're so thrilled to share our day with those who mean the most. Dress code semi-formal with a pop of color. Please arrive 30 minutes early for photos." Photos. I turned the card over. On the back in smaller handwriting, someone had scrawled, "You'll be directed where to go upon arrival." I sat down right there on the edge of the couch, the envelope slipping from my lap. It fluttered to the floor like a slow, deliberate insult. I stared at it for a long time. The kind of long that stops time altogether. I'd always imagined that day differently, not because I needed the spotlight, I didn't. I'd imagined holding my son's face before the ceremony, smoothing his collar like I did on his first day of school. I'd imagined standing near him close enough to see his eyes shine. I thought I might help the bride with her veil. Say something reassuring. Be a small, quiet part of a memory they'd keep forever. Not front and center, just visible. Instead, I was being managed, controlled. Placed where I could be seen the least, heard the least, and if possible, not even noticed. A few days before the wedding, I received a group email with the final itinerary. Attached were instructions for shuttle pickup meal choices and guest responsibilities. A polite bulleted list. I wasn't mentioned once. Not even under family. There was a note to meet the parents at the rehearsal dinner with a list of introductions for the MC to read aloud. Mother of the groom. Pamela nurturing, elegant and welcoming. Pamela. His stepmother. I scrolled down scanning for my name. It wasn't there. I stared at the screen until my eyes burned the edges of the text, turning soft and gray. Then I closed my laptop and sat in the stillness. It was all so quiet. That night I walked into the garage and pulled down a box from the shelf. It was labeled in black marker Ian, early years. Inside were crayon drawings, Father's Day cards addressed to me because there was no one else, and a wrinkled paper crown he made me in kindergarten that read, "World's Best Mom," in crooked glue and glitter. I touched it like it was glass. There was also a journal I used to keep mostly little notes, updates, pieces of motherhood I didn't want to forget. I flipped it open to a page dated October 1997. He asked today if Dad's come back. I told him not all of them, but the good ones always stay. He asked if I was enough for him. I told him he was my whole heart. He smiled and fell asleep in my lap. I ran my fingers over that entry. The ink faded with time. I remembered writing it. Sitting on the floor with him, his head warm against my ribs, the sound of the wind against the windows. And now, somehow I had become the one erased. There's a violence to being rewritten while you're still alive, to watching someone else get handed your title, your memories, your place at the table. And the worst part, there's no scream inside that moment. Just silence. Just the awful echoing truth that you aren't needed anymore. But need isn't love. It never was. I realized that for all those years, I had tethered my self-worth to his affection, his approval, his presence. I had shaped myself around his needs, his timelines, his emergencies. I thought it was motherhood. I thought it was devotion, but it was dependence, a soft, quiet kind that looks noble until the day you realize it's hollow. The night before the wedding, I steamed my dress anyway, pressed it carefully, hung it on the back of the door, and sat beside it for a long while. I took out my mother's pearls and laid them gently on a folded napkin. I opened a bottle of red wine, not the cheap kind, the good one I was saving, and poured a glass. I didn't toast. I didn't cry. I just sat there, sipping slowly, the warmth moving through me like a final lullaby. I went to bed early and dreamed of nothing. The morning of the wedding was bright. Clear sky, soft sun. I took my time getting ready. Lipstick, carefully applied hair brushed into soft waves. I looked at myself in the mirror, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't recognize the woman staring back. She looked like someone who was done begging. I arrived at the venue exactly on time. Not early, not late, not in a way that would give anyone the satisfaction of thinking I'd made a mistake. The estate was even grander than I'd expected, with white columns and manicured hedges, the kind of place people post on Instagram with captions like, "Forever starts here." Guests were already gathering near the ceremony site, women in pastel chiffon and men in tailored navy suits. I recognized no one. I walked slowly, heels sinking into the soft grass, careful not to twist my ankle. The teal dress floated just above my knees, and my mother's pearls lay cool against my collarbone. I held my small clutch close, fingers clamped tight around it like it might fly from my hand if I didn't anchor it. No one greeted me. No one even looked twice. I spotted him at the front, my son standing tall in his slate gray suit, adjusting his cufflinks as the photographer arranged people around him. She was there too, Marissa radiant in lace, laughing with her mother, who stood like a queen beside her. My son leaned toward her, whispering something, his hand resting lightly on her lower back. He looked older than I remembered, sharper, not harder exactly, just further away. He didn't turn around, not once. I didn't try to make myself known. The usher, a college-aged boy with flushed cheeks and too much hair gel, asked for my name. I gave it softly. He blinked down at his clipboard and pointed to a white folding chair near the back row under partial shade. "You're here, I believe." I thanked him and took my seat. The ceremony began minutes later. The music started, gentle strings, some classical tune I couldn't place. The bride came down the aisle in soft steps, her veil trailing like mist behind her. Everyone stood. I did too, not out of respect, but because I didn't want to give them another reason to say I was difficult. I watched my son cry as she approached. He looked at her like she was his beginning and end. It should have broken me, but I felt nothing, not even jealousy, just stillness, like I was watching someone else's life play out, someone else's son, someone else's joy. The boy I raised wasn't there anymore. Or maybe he was. Maybe this had always been him, and I had simply loved a version that never really existed outside of my own need. The ceremony ended with cheers, applause, the usual eruption of relief and joy. I clapped politely. People filed toward the reception hall. I lingered back, not wanting to be in the way, not wanting to sit through conversations about honeymoon plans or the color palette of napkins. The reception hall was bright, filled with the shimmer of chandeliers and laughter echoing off glassware. I found the seating chart mounted on an ornate mirror near the entrance, names in elegant cursive grouped by table, organized by importance. Family bridal party, friends of the groom, friends of the bride, extended family, other guests. My name was under other. No table number, no last name. Just Eleanor M., not mother of the groom, not even Mrs. Just a letter and a mistake they hoped would stay quiet. I stared at it longer than I should have, not because I was surprised, but because I wanted to commit that feeling to memory, the exact moment I stopped needing them. A young woman in a headset approached the coordinator, probably. She smiled nervously, glancing down at her notes. "Oh, right. I think they had you listed without a table." They didn't give me a name, but... She stopped herself. I nodded. It's okay, I said. It won't be necessary. She blinked. Excuse me? I looked around the room, every seat filled, every glass raised. And still somehow there was nowhere for me. I stepped past her heels, clicking against the marble floor, the sound echoing louder than any accusation I could have spoken. My hands didn't shake this time. My shoulders didn't slouch. I walked to the edge of the room just close enough to see my son at the head table. He was smiling, laughing. His arm draped around his new bride like she was the center of the world. He didn't look up. Not once. And that was the confrontation. There was no need for raised voices or theatrical exits. The silence was enough. My absence would echo more than any speech could. I turned around and left. The summer heat outside hadn't faded. The evening light turned everything gold soft, forgiving. I stood at the edge of the parking lot and let the warmth wash over me. Somewhere behind me the music swelled. The DJ calling out the bridal party. Applause. Clinking glasses. And me standing alone, more whole than I'd felt in years. I walked away without looking back. Not because I was strong, but because I was done. I didn't go home right away. I couldn't. Our house suddenly felt like a stranger's place. I wasn't ready to walk back into those familiar walls and see the framed pictures of a boy who no longer knew me. So I let the cab drop me off downtown again, and I walked. Past lit-up restaurants, past couples in sandals laughing over wine, past little shops with summer dresses in the windows I would never wear. Eventually, I ended up at the same Italian place by the river. The hostess recognized me from the week before, same corner table, same quiet entrance. She asked if I wanted a menu. I said no. I just needed a glass of red and a bit of stillness. The wine came. I cupped it like it was the only thing in the world that could hold me up. The truth was, I didn't feel sad anymore. Not even hollow. What I felt was something closer to clarity. A long, slow exhale I didn't know I'd been holding for years. For the first time in my adult life, I realized I didn't owe anyone my suffering. I didn't need to explain why I left. I didn't need to defend what I'd done for him or remind anyone what it had cost me to be his mother. The evidence was written in my body, in the creases of my hands, in the curve of my spine, in the thousands of nights I sat awake worrying if he was warm or safe or fed. I had spent 3 decades shaping my life around his orbit, building routines like scaffolding to support his dreams, his future, his happiness. And in the end, he had simply stepped off the structure without so much as a backward glance and left me standing in the wreckage of everything I'd given up. That night, I made a quiet decision. No grand vows, no ceremony, just a whisper in my own mind, like a secret between me and the world. I would not wait for him to come around. I would not leave my porch light on hoping he'd return. I would not keep his room the same like a shrine to something that had died without notice. I would not check his social media to see if he was happy. I would not remember the child he was as an excuse to forgive the man he'd become. I went home late after the streets had emptied. The house was still. No laughter, no music, no echo of footsteps on the stairs. It was mine again, not because I'd claimed it, but because they'd abandoned it. I took down the framed wedding announcement on the refrigerator and placed it in the trash. I didn't shred it. I didn't rip it. I simply let it go. I poured the last of the wine into a glass and sat on the back porch listening to the cicadas whir. The next morning I made a list. It wasn't dramatic, just a handwritten list on a notepad from the insurance company. It read, cancel gift for Marissa, delete wedding photos folder, call jewelry shop to sell bracelet, reclaim master bedroom, book trip solo, maybe Maine, sign up for oil painting class, dinner for one every Friday, new sheets, remove Ian's spare key from key rack. That last one took me a minute, not because I couldn't do it, but because I realized I'd never even thought of it before. That little silver key had hung there for years, unused, but present like a thread tying him back to me. I took it off the hook, laid it in the drawer, and shut it slowly. 2 weeks passed before I heard from him. It was a Tuesday afternoon, hot and brittle. I was watering the potted plants on the front steps when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I answered without thinking. Hi. Mom. His voice was tentative, almost boyish. For a second I closed my eyes and let it hit me that he still used that word, that he remembered how to say it. I just wanted to check in, he said. I didn't see you at the reception. I thought maybe you left early. I didn't respond right away. I let the silence stretch between us like a bridge half built. I did, I said simply. Oh. Well, I hope everything was okay, Marissa said. I think there was confusion about the table chart or something. I didn't answer his excuses. I didn't fill in the blanks for him. I hope you're happy, I said. Not bitter. Not sarcastic. Just true. And then I ended the call. I turned the phone off and went back to watering the plants. The soil smelled warm and earthy. The sun fell soft across my shoulders. That was the last time we spoke. I didn't block him. I didn't send any letters. I didn't tell him what he'd done, or how it felt, or how long it took me to crawl back into myself, because I wasn't crawling anymore. I was walking. Sometimes I take myself to dinner. Lipstick, earrings, a good book tucked into my purse. I order dessert without asking anyone else if they want to split it. I take long walks without checking my phone. I laugh loudly when I want to and sit quietly when I don't. And some nights, not all but enough, I sleep all the way through until morning. The first thing I did was change the sheets. It sounds small, I know, but those old sheets, pale blue soft from years of wear, still smelled faintly like him, like detergent and the cologne he used when he was younger. I hadn't realized how long I'd left the master bedroom untouched. After he moved in with Marissa, after they took over that part of the house, I'd simply let it sit, like it wasn't mine anymore, like I didn't have the right to reclaim it. But that morning, something shifted. I pulled off the old bedding with steady hands and tossed it into a donation bag. I opened the windows, let the sunlight flood in. The room felt stale, but the breeze stirred something. Not grief, not anger, space. I bought new sheets, linen crisp ivory. I chose them carefully, not for practicality, but because they made me feel like I mattered. I picked out a new duvet, soft gray, and 2 matching pillows that I fluffed and placed like I was preparing the room for someone important. Because I was. I took down the photos on the wall, the college graduation shot, the beach trip we took in 2008, the picture of us in the hospital hallway when he broke his arm. I didn't throw them out. I placed them in a box, sealed it with tape, and labeled it simply, Then. Then, not now. I signed up for an oil painting class on Wednesday nights. The community center was only 10 minutes away, but I'd driven past it for years without ever going in. When I walked through the doors, the receptionist smiled and said, "Are you here for someone?" I shook my head. No. I told her. Just me. That first night I sat at an easel beside a woman named Diane, who'd lost her husband the year before. She painted flowers. I painted clouds. Neither of us spoke for a while, but when class ended, she touched my arm and said, "You look like someone who's finally letting the world touch her again." I don't know why, but I almost cried. I started wearing perfume again, just a little behind the ears. I wore earrings on Tuesday afternoons, even if I had nowhere to be. I took myself to the bookstore and lingered in the poetry section. Bought a small volume by a woman whose name I couldn't pronounce. Read it cover to cover in one night. I began to discover how much space I actually had, not just in my house, but in my own head. It had been so full of him, of his needs, his moods, his rhythms. When he was a baby, I used to sleep lightly tuned to his every breath. That kind of alertness never really left me. Even after he moved out, I'd still jolt awake sometimes, thinking he was calling out from the next room. That stopped. I didn't realize it had until one morning I woke to birdsong and sunlight, no panic, no aching heart, and just lay there, listening, breathing, free. I told one friend. Just one. Her name's Linda. We've known each other since we worked together in our 30s, back when our sons were both in kindergarten, and we used to joke that we were raising them to be better men. She'd always been careful around the subject of Ian. She knew how tightly I'd built my world around him. We had coffee one afternoon. I told her what happened at the wedding. She didn't interrupt. She didn't gasp. She just took my hand and said, "Eleanor, I wish you could see what I see. You've always been more than just a mother, but you were too good at it. They let you disappear." Her words stayed with me. They let you disappear. Not you vanished. Not you gave too much. They let you. As if it were a collective decision, unspoken, slow-moving, and cruel. And I realized something else that day. There are women like me everywhere. Women who gave until there was nothing left to give, and then were expected to be grateful for the silence that followed. Women who were told they were too much and then not enough, who were celebrated only in absence, who wore pearls to weddings they were never meant to belong to. We see each other. Now when I go out, I look for those women. In the grocery line. At the park. On the bus carrying a canvas bag filled with books or groceries or both. We nod at each other. We know. I haven't blocked my son. His number still sits in my phone. But I turned off notifications for messages from him. Not out of spite, out of self-preservation. If he wants to reach me, he can. But I won't be waiting. Not anymore. Sometimes I do wonder if he feels anything. If he notices I've stepped back not out of guilt or hurt, but because I am no longer willing to sit at a table where I'm not invited. But I don't dwell on it. He made his choices, and now I make mine. It was late September when I finally removed the last of his things from the hall closet. A jacket he left behind, worn corduroy, frayed at the elbows, hung limp and heavy against the inside door. It still smelled faintly like him, like that sandalwood aftershave he started using in college. I held it for a moment, fingers buried in the sleeves before folding it neatly and setting it into the donation pile. It wasn't a declaration, just a gentle closing, a soft, final exhale. I cleaned out the rest of the shelf, an old box of his keepsakes, 2 mismatched gloves, a stack of unopened mail still addressed here. I bundled it all and wrote his name on the outside, just his name, no son, no label, no warmth. I drove it to the post office, mailed it without ceremony, and didn't include a note. That same week, I started the Friday dinners. It began with a reservation, just one seat, one name, at a little French bistro tucked between a florist and a closed bookstore. I wore a navy dress and a silk scarf knotted at my throat, the kind of thing I used to save for someone else's approval. Now, it was for me. The hostess raised her brows when I said table for one, but I didn't flinch. I took the table by the window, ordered the duck confit and a glass of Bordeaux. Halfway through the meal, an older couple at the next table leaned over and asked if I was waiting for someone. No, I said with the first real smile I'd felt in months. This is just for me. They nodded like they understood. And maybe they did. There's a freedom that comes from choosing solitude, not loneliness, not exile, but the kind of aloneness that has weight and shape, that holds space instead of shrinking inside it. I began to love the sound of my own silence again. Not the silence of being dismissed or excluded, but the silence of being full and still and unclaimed. The painting class became a ritual. Diane and I started carpooling, and sometimes after class, we'd go to the diner for pie and talk about everything except our children. She told me once with a bittersweet smile that she hadn't said her son's name in a year. Not because she couldn't, but because she'd stopped trying to keep him alive in her mouth. I love him, she said, but I don't carry his weight anymore. I nodded. I knew what she meant. We are taught to carry them from womb to first steps to graduation stages and heartbreaks and hospital beds. But no one teaches us how to put them down, how to say I did my part. And now I am mine again. One night alone in my room, I pulled out a journal and began writing. Not about him, not about the wedding, about me. I wrote, "Today I made soup from scratch. I listened to Ella Fitzgerald. I wore the green cardigan. I laughed twice. I didn't think of him. That became my ritual too. A new kind of record keeping. Not for anyone else to see, not as proof, just as witness. For myself." I started noticing the small things, the way the afternoon light hit the wall near the window, how the lavender in the garden bloomed late this year, the sound of rain against the roof when I stayed in bed too long, the way my breath caught during certain songs, the subtle pleasure of walking into a clean kitchen and knowing no one would come behind me to undo it. These were not victories, not in the way people talk about overcoming. These were returns, pieces of myself finding their way back, not loud, not triumphant, just present. Sometimes I'd think back to the wedding, to the white chairs, the music, the way I stood at the edge of it all like an extra in a story I used to believe I was the center of. And I'd ask myself the same question, why didn't he stop me? But the truth is, I already knew. Because I had made it easy. Because I had been the quiet one, the dependable one, the one who always adjusted, absorbed, accepted. I had taught him without meaning to that I would stay no matter how far from the table he pushed me. I don't blame him for that anymore. Not fully, because I see now he learned it from me. He learned it in the way I silenced my own dreams, smiled through exhaustion, folded laundry instead of speaking up. He learned it in the way I set my needs aside again and again, calling it love. I thought I was modeling sacrifice, but what I really taught him was how to overlook me. And so I stopped teaching him. I stopped answering every text. I stopped showing up in ways that cost me too much. I stopped hoping he'd remember the mother who sat at his bedside for 3 straight nights after his appendectomy, who worked overtime to afford his senior trip, who cried alone in a bathroom stall the day he left for college. Because that woman? She did what she had to do. And this woman, she's doing the same. except now the duty is to herself. I started dreaming again. Not the kind of dreams where you run or fall or wake up gasping. The other kind, the quieter ones. In one, I was on a train heading north. No destination, just movement. The window beside me was streaked with rain, and I had a thermos in my lap. There was no one waiting for me, no one I had to answer to. I wasn't escaping. I was arriving. I began planning a trip, nothing extravagant, just a week in Maine. I'd always wanted to see the coast in October. Something about the thought of waves against the rocks, the kind of gray sky that feels ancient, like it holds its own wisdom. I booked a small cottage near the water, paid for it in full, no refund, a promise to myself I couldn't back out of. When I told Diane, she laughed and said, "You're finally going to see yourself in the wild." I smiled, but I knew what she meant. There was a time not that long ago when I wouldn't have done this, when I wouldn't have eaten alone in a restaurant, let alone traveled solo. I would have waited for someone to join me to make it feel valid. I would have worried it looked indulgent, sad. I would have made excuses, too expensive, too far, too selfish. But I don't speak to myself that way anymore. Not since the wedding. That word still sits strangely in my mouth, wedding. I used to think it meant joy union family, but now it means something different. Now it's a hinge in the door frame of my life the day everything swung wide open and the truth came rushing through. I used to rewatch the videos they posted, the ones where they're dancing, where her mother is giving a toast, where the camera pans across the tables, all of them full, except for one. The one marked other guests near the catering station. A chair, then no chair. A ghost. One night I paused the video and studied his face, my son's, as he laughed beside his bride. His eyes crinkled, his head tilted slightly back. He looked free. Not free from obligation, free from me. And that realization when it landed didn't hurt the way I thought it would, because I didn't want to be a burden. I never did. I just wanted to be seen. That was always it. Not celebrated, not honored, not praised, just seen. But when someone spends long enough in the corner of your life, eventually you stop noticing they're there at all. And when they leave, you don't even feel the draft. I was tired of being the draft. So I began changing the locks, not on the doors, but on the parts of myself I'd left wide open. The parts that said yes when I meant please don't. The parts that whispered maybe they didn't mean it when the meaning was plain. I forgave myself for how long it took. Because that's what healing looks like, not a straight line, but a slow turning inward, a remembering. On a quiet Sunday morning, I went through my phone and deleted old voicemails, birthday wishes from years past, messages reminding me of appointments, half-laughed stories he'd left during college. I hesitated on one from the week after he got engaged. His voice sounded happy. Real. Mom, it's happening. I can't believe she said yes. Call me when you can. I almost saved it. Then I thought about the email, the table, the silence. I hit delete, and the world didn't end. That same day, I planted dahlias in the backyard, deep orange sunset pink. My knees ached when I knelt down and the dirt worked its way under my nails, but I felt alive in a way I hadn't in years. I worked until dusk, until my back screamed and the mosquitoes came. Then I sat with a cup of tea and watched the sun settle low, thinking, this is enough. Not because it filled the hole he left. That hole will always be there in some shape, but because I no longer need to fill it. I just walk around it now, like a crack in the floorboards. Familiar, navigable. And I leave space for something else to grow. I still keep the box, The one with his old drawings, the glitter crown, the journals. I keep it on the top shelf of my closet, not to revisit, but to remember who I was, who we were before the erasure, before I learned how to be the main character in my own story again, before I understood that I don't need a child's love to be whole, that I can love the girl I once was, the girl who made boxed macaroni on payday and read the same bedtime story 7 nights in a row, the girl who stayed, who gave, who built a life out of duct tape and hope. She deserved more. So now I give it to her. In flowers, in walks along the river, in unshared meals and red lipstick and new sheets, in the way I answer the question, "Are you here alone with a calm quiet?" Yes. It rained the morning I left for Maine. A soft, misty drizzle, not the dramatic kind with thunder and downed branches, just enough to darken the pavement and make the trees smell like earth and new beginnings. I loaded my suitcase into the trunk of a rental car, slipped on a windbreaker, and sat behind the wheel longer than necessary. I stared at the front door of my house, the closed curtains, the porch light I'd left off. There was no one to wave goodbye to me. And that strangely finally felt right. I turned the ignition, pulled out of the driveway, and didn't look back. The drive north was quiet. Miles of trees and open sky, the occasional gas station humming with other people's destinations. I played jazz on low volume. I didn't think about him. Not in the old way, not in that ache-heavy, unfinished way. He was somewhere out there, maybe working, maybe laughing, maybe sitting beside someone who called me difficult. That was fine. Let them. Let them build their story. I wasn't in it anymore. By late afternoon, I reached the cottage. White shutters weather deck the sea visible just beyond the wild grass that bordered the back porch. It smelled like salt and pine, and the kind of clean air you only get when no one is watching you breathe. Inside, everything was simple. 1 bedroom, a tiny kitchen, a fireplace. I unpacked slowly. My books, my journal, my scarf. I placed each thing with care, not because it needed to be perfect, but because I wanted to honor the woman who had finally arrived. That night, I sat on the porch wrapped in a blanket drinking tea and listening to the waves slap the shore like an old lullaby. There were no fireworks, no breakthrough epiphanies, just stillness, just the sound of my own pulse steady calm mine. And yet in that quiet, I thought of him again. Not the man in the gray suit who looked through me like I was a hotel guest who'd overstayed. Not the man who let a stranger speak for him, but the little boy in dinosaur pajamas, the one who once fell asleep in my lap mid-sentence, clutching a plastic stegosaurus like it held his whole world together. I thought of how I used to carry him from the couch to his bed, his body warm and heavy, his breath slow against my neck. I would press my lips to his temple and whisper, "You're safe. You're loved." I'm here. Back then, I believed love was a rope that tied 2 hearts together permanently. Now I know better. Love, true love, is not about tethering. It's about choosing again and again without obligation or convenience. It's not about proximity. It's about presence. And sometimes it's about knowing when to leave. He chose his path. I chose mine. And maybe we'll meet again someday in some quiet moment years from now with our edges softened and our expectations lowered. Maybe we'll sit across from each other and smile and say nothing that needs repairing. Or maybe we won't. Either way, I'll be okay. Because this life, this small, imperfect, gently reclaimed life is mine now, fully mine. I spent the week reading by the fire, walking barefoot along the rocky shore, eating lobster rolls on paper plates with butter dripping down my wrist. I spoke to no one unless I wanted to. I took photos of the sky, the kind of sky that looks like it's holding something back, something sacred. I wrote in my journal every day, not about him, about what I saw, what I felt, what I tasted. I wrote, today. I found a small white stone shaped like a heart. I held it until it was warm. I placed it back on the sand. Not everything precious is meant to be kept. On my last morning, I stood at the edge of the water in my old rain boots, the hem of my coat tugging in the wind. I looked out at the horizon, a line both solid and unknowable, and said quietly to no one, "Thank you." Not to him, not to them, to me, for surviving, for walking away, for learning to want something more than being wanted. And as the wind picked up and the first drops of rain kissed my cheeks, I smiled, not because I was healed, but because I was healing. And I knew wherever I went next, I'd bring all of me. Not just the parts that were useful, not just the mother, the woman, the whole quiet, glorious woman who once wore her best dress to a wedding where no one saved her a seat and walked out like a queen with nowhere to sit but everywhere to be. The seasons shifted while I wasn't looking. By the time I returned from Maine, the air in my neighborhood had turned crisp, the trees beginning to blush at their edges. It was the time of year I used to decorate the porch with pumpkins and cinnamon-scented wreaths when I'd text Ian a photo of the first leaf that turned orange, and he'd reply with a pumpkin emoji or a thumbs up. That text never came. The porch stayed bare. And I didn't mind. I spent more time in the garden. The dahlias had bloomed like they were determined to be seen, their fiery petals bright against the fading green. I clipped a few and placed them in a glass vase in the center of the kitchen table, the same table where I once hosted birthdays, holidays, even the occasional Sunday dinner when he still dropped by. Now it was just for me. I ate there in silence. I lit a candle even when I ate leftovers. I poured wine without waiting for company. There was a new rhythm to my life. Soft, deliberate. I woke up early, brewed coffee in the quiet, and watched the news only long enough to hear the weather. I read. I painted. I took long walks without checking the time. I listened to music I liked, not what he'd left on the car radio, not what filled the house when they stayed over. I did small things that felt like declarations. I changed the wallpaper on my phone, deleted the old family album from my cloud. I updated my emergency contact from Ian M. to Diane. When the dentist office called to confirm his next appointment, I told them politely, "He hasn't lived here for some time." I cleaned out the attic, found old photo albums I hadn't touched in years, thick binders of a life I curated page by page. Him in Halloween costumes, school plays, swimming lessons, smiling, always smiling. I sat with those pictures for a while, touching his little paper face, remembering the sound of his laugh at 6, the way he once introduced me to his kindergarten teacher with pride in his voice. "This is my mom. She makes the best pancakes." I closed the albums and placed them on the shelf. I didn't throw them away, but I didn't cry either. Grief had stopped asking for permission. It just came now and then like a breeze through a cracked window. I let it in, then I let it go. It's strange what people assume about women my age, that we shrink with time, that our usefulness peaks early, then slips quietly out the back door while no one's looking, that if we're alone we must be aching, that if we aren't chosen we must be bitter. But I am not bitter. I am wide. There is more of me now than there has ever been. Not because I'm louder, not because I've filled the space he left, but because I finally stopped pouring myself into people who only offered me cracks. I went to the farmer's market one Saturday morning in a rust-colored scarf and bold lipstick. I bought honey from a man with crooked teeth and fresh lavender from a girl who smelled like rosemary and hope. A woman I didn't know complimented my earrings. I smiled and said they were a gift to myself. I didn't say why. She didn't need to know. Some stories are too sacred to share in passing. They belong in letters in long walks, in the silence between piano notes. They belong in soft gazes across quiet tables. They belong to us. A few weeks later, Ian sent a card. It arrived in a plain envelope with his handwriting on the front, familiar, clumsy, rushed. Inside was a folded piece of stationery that read, "Happy birthday, Mom. I hope you're doing well. I think about you. Ian." That was it. No call. No return address. I held the card for a long time, turned it over, looked for something that wasn't there. A word, a sentence, a sign that he understood what he'd done, but it wasn't there. Just a line that said he thought of me. It was enough. Not enough to bring me back, but enough to know I still lived somewhere in his mind. A shape, a shadow, maybe a memory he hadn't yet made peace with. Maybe one day he would. Or maybe he wouldn't. I placed the card in a drawer, not the trash, not the box of keepsakes, just a drawer, because that's where it belonged, close but not sacred. A reminder of the distance between us and of the woman who no longer needed to close it. Winter came early that year. Frost lined the windows before Thanksgiving, and the radiator kicked on in the middle of the night like it was startled awake. I watched the first snow fall from my living room window, cupping a warm mug between my hands wrapped in a cardigan that still smelled faintly of salt air and lavender from Maine. The house was quiet, but it didn't feel empty anymore. I'd grown used to the sound of my own footsteps, to the shape of the day unfolding without interruption, to the small, steady comforts of solitude. I made a roast that week, a small one, just enough for two. I packed half of it into a container and dropped it at Diane's the next morning with a note. Still too much food even now. She texted me later that night. "I miss being invisible with you. Let's go be loud somewhere soon." I laughed. We made plans for New Year's Eve. Not the wild kind, but a quiet dinner at her place, a bottle of Prosecco between us, a film neither of us had seen. We'd agreed no talk of children, no talk of holidays past. Just now. Just here. Christmas came and went. No call. No visit. He posted a photo online, he and Marissa matching sweaters, a tree glowing behind them, mugs of hot cocoa raised like trophies. Her mother stood between them, smiling wide. Underneath the caption, "Family time is the best time." I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I didn't zoom in on the background or read the comments or wonder if he'd meant to hurt me. I just logged out. Because the truth is, I don't belong in that picture. Not anymore. Maybe not ever. And that's okay. Because I've started building new pictures, smaller ones that only I can see. I take mental snapshots the way the sun slips through the blinds in the late afternoon, the way the wine glass feels heavy in my hand, balanced just right, the sound of my boots crunching in fresh snow, the quiet click of the porch light as I switch it off each night, not waiting for anyone to come home. I've even started painting faces, not people I know, just expressions. Women who look like they've survived something. Women with strong mouths and tired eyes. Women who wear silence like silk. One of them looks a little like me, but not quite. She's more weathered, more vivid, more alive. Sometimes I imagine what I'd say to him if he asked. If he showed up one day and said, "Tell me what happened. Tell me why you left." I think I'd sit him down and make tea and say I didn't leave. I was erased, but I found myself again in the space you made. But he hasn't asked, and I'm not holding the story in my throat anymore, waiting for a listener. I've already heard it. I've already lived it. I've already survived it. And that I've learned is enough. Some evenings I still wear the teal dress, the one I wore to his wedding. Not for revenge, not to remember. Just because it fits me well. Because it feels like mine again. I wear it with bare feet, my hair down, and a soft record playing in the background. Sometimes I dance in it just a little, just around the kitchen. No audience, no applause, just movement, just breath, just me. I have reclaimed every inch of this house, every photo taken down, every corner dusted, every cabinet rearranged. Not to erase the past, but to make space for a different kind of presence. One that isn't tied to anyone else's expectations. One that doesn't wait to be invited. One that doesn't sit at the edge of a room hoping to be seen. I have made a place for myself at my own table. And I sit there head high, eyes forward, as the woman I was always meant to become.